morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you for watching. We've got a perfectly adequate show for you today, I do believe, from having looked at the prepared materials. I'm excited to discuss it.
You're the absolute hype man for today's material, obviously, Robert. I'm glad to see we're talking that up to the maximum.
I'm always channeling my old co-host Ryan Grimm.
Yes.
Who had that very dry delivery.
A man of enormous enthusiasm for all things. Well, let's get to something we are enthusiastic about. Robby, what is on your radar?
Well, when is a news story not a news story? Maybe when Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense, utterly disproves it before it's even published. So here's what happened. Yesterday, Hegseth posted on X that the journalistic organization ProPublica, which he described as a, quote, left-wing hack group, we can debate about that, was planning to publish a bombshell report contradicting Hegseth's account that he had been accepted to West Point in 1999. Hegseth set the record straight by publishing his letter of acceptance, signed by West Point Superintendent Lieutenant General Daniel Christman of the U.S. Army. Combat veteran and conservative pundit Rob Smith celebrated Hegseth for putting down what would have been an entirely fake news cycle generated by, he says, left-wing billionaires. Indeed, ProPublica is funded in part by the charitable foundations of extremely wealthy families like the Fords and also the Carnegies. But ProPublica's editor, Jesse Eisinger, is defending his institution's behavior, noting that, well, they didn't actually publish the article. Quote, we asked West Point Public Affairs, which told us twice on the record that he hadn't even applied there. We reached out, Hegseth's spokesperson gave us his acceptance letter, and we didn't publish the story. That's journalism. Now, in a tweet thread, Eisinger explained what happened. First, his reporter contacted the West Point Public Affairs office to inquire about Hegseth's claim that he was indeed accepted there. The reporter was told by West Point in no uncertain terms that Hegseth had never even applied there. Eisinger wrote that now we thought we had the makings of a significant story. But the first rule of good journalism is no surprises. You must give the subject of a potential story a fair chance to respond to all of the salient facts. Again, end quote. So they reached out to Hegseth. Hegseth was able to provide, as I mentioned before, a copy of the acceptance letter, which prompted ProPublica to go back to West Point, which issued an apology, writing in a statement, a review of our records indicates Mr. Peter Hegseth was offered admission to West Point in 1999, but did not attend. They apologized for the error. Eisinger said, at that point, ProPublica killed the story. Quote, this is how journalism is supposed to work. Hear something, check something, repeat steps 1 and 2 as many times as needed, the end. So look, actually ProPublica deserves credit for checking and double-checking and not publishing something false and defamatory about a conservative Trump supporter and high-profile nominee. Ultimately, they didn't fall for the lie, and they didn't repeat it. Great. But here's my question. Why not publish the story? Now the story isn't that Pete Hegseth lied about getting into West Point. The story is that West Point lied about Pete Hegseth not getting into West Point. If ProPublica published that story, they'd be able to take a real victory lap. We tracked down a malicious rumor about Pete Hegseth, and we found out it wasn't true, despite a prestigious educational institution's efforts to mislead us. Isn't there a story here about West Point getting an easily checked fact wrong? Or is the story only important if it's damaging to Pete Hegseth? A negative story is a story, but not a positive story? Because make no mistake, there's been a major effort to drag Hegseth's name through the mud, relitigating all of his, admittedly messy, past romantic relationships and marriages. The New York Times even brought Hegseth's mother into the picture, you remember that from last week, publishing an email that she sent him years ago objecting to his treatment of the wife he was in the process of divorcing. Are embarrassing, long-ago family disputes relevant to the position of Defense Secretary? Mom's email aside, much of the damaging reporting on Hegseth's personal behavior has come from anonymous sources. The on-the-record sources who confirmed that Hegseth is a reliable and stand-up person, according to them, well, that's gotten a lot less attention from the mainstream media. His former colleagues at Fox News and at Concerned Veterans for America are telling a different story. Some of them told the Washington Free Beacon that he's being unfairly smeared, that he was not involved in that boorish behavior attributed to him in earlier anonymous reports. Now, earlier this week, Republican Senator Joni Ernst confirmed she will be supporting Hegseth, largely putting an end to the idea this nomination is going up in flames, like, for instance, Matt Gaetz. I fully expect Hegseth will indeed be confirmed. So I wanted to do a radar in this because I actually saw a lot of conservative griping about ProPublica in this case, and including from Pete Hegseth. I wanted to point out that, well, they did most of the right thing, at least. They did not actually publish the story. They checked and double-checked and triple-checked, and really the error was on West Point.
Right.
But then I still think that's where the story that West Point almost caused to, fabricate the entire idea that he had lied about getting into West Point, which would have been a big deal.
So first of all, I think ProPublica did its job completely fine. I don't see what the issue really was with them making an inquiry about something they had heard. They had got it, they said, twice confirmed on the record from West Point, and then they went back and forth and it proved to be wrong and they didn't publish it. That's just good journalism and checking something that you have heard to see if it can be verified or not. I think I would differ from you in that I think you are imputing malevolence to West Point as if they were trying to blacken Pete Hegseth's name. My working assumption is that somebody in an office could find no record of him ever applying, said he never applied, and were incorrect about that, and Hegseth was able to prove that they were incorrect. The broader point I would make, though, about the other allegations about Pete Hegseth is, I think as long as one discusses them fairly, which I think we have done here, I think it is, broadly speaking, in the public interest to know these things. So the most serious but unproven allegation against Pete Hegseth is this idea that he sexually assaulted someone in the hotel in California. No charges were pressed, which we have mentioned, I think, every time we have discussed it. He did pay money to his accuser to settle a legal case or legal claim. I think those are relevant things for the public to know about the nominee to lead the Pentagon with its approximately 3 million employees and $800 billion budget, so long as one does not topple over into imputing guilt that cannot actually be proven.
I agree with that. That one, he did pay out a settlement, and it's an accusation of a criminal act, and of course is fair game to discuss and needs to be discussed and is being discussed. That's fine. I think the media outlets that discuss that should, then go into the other stuff, the history with other women, well then should discuss and are relying on reliable anonymous people saying that he drinks too much or something of that nature. Well, but then there's people on the record who are saying that that's not true. And then we didn't discuss this because you weren't on that week, but I really struggled with the New York Times publishing that email from mom, again, detailing not criminal abuse or violence or sexual assault, but the way he has treated women in romantic relationships, not meeting mom's approval. That, to me, from years ago, gets into very messy family drama that I don't know ought to be litigated in the pages of the New York Times.
Yeah, I mean, I could debate that one either way. I think the pungent and potent phrase the mom used was considering him an abuser of women. And I do think you could make an argument for it on that basis, but I'm not blind to the argument that if we all started putting family emails on the front page of the New York Times, nobody would look very good, right? And it gets all sorts of stuff into the public domain, which maybe is really doesn't have the substance to get there.
Yeah. I think he's getting confirmed. What do you think?
I think so. I mean, and I have changed my mind on that, actually. At one point, his nomination looked very shaky, and it seemed like people like Senator Joni Ernst were leaning against. She has now changed position. The fundamental change that appears to have happened is that Trump, who looked to be wavering at one point, no longer appears to be wavering, seems to be giving him pretty emphatic backing. I think the chances of a significant number of Republican senators voting in outright defiance of Trump seems unlikely unless more serious allegations come out.
Much like the Kavanaugh confirmation stuff, Trump eerily has remained pretty quiet about his nominees through this process, letting it play out, trusting his media surrogates, the MAGA people on TV, on social media, to fight for them without Trump doing it himself, a strategy that worked in the Kavanaugh case. He didn't wade in, blow it up, make it worse. I remember thinking, wow, he does have political tact. He knows to shh about this one and let it play out and it will work out in his favor. And I think that same playbook has happened here.
And I think briefly, the fact that Matt Gaetz fell may not actually be all that damaging to the rest of Trump's nominations, because it's one example where someone didn't have the votes to make it, which then,
Yes.
anyway, yes.
Yes, indeed. All right, lots more coming up on our show today. Can't wait to bring it to you. As I said, perfectly adequate. Is that what I said? It's beyond that. That was a joke. You know that. More Rising coming up right after this.
On The View Wednesday, former President Bill Clinton talked about a possible preemptive pardon for his wife, Hillary Clinton.
Mr. President, Donald Trump will be returning to the White House, unburdened by the pressure of re-election, with sweeping immunity granted to him, I believe, by the Supreme Court, and an alleged enemies list, we're hearing. Do you think it would be wise of President Biden to preemptively pardon any potential targets? What about your wife, Hillary Clinton? She apparently is on Kash Patel's list.
For what?
Yeah.
Well, they got a problem with her because first, she didn't do anything wrong. I guess if Kash Patel is determined to make one up, he could do it. But I think if President Biden wanted to talk to me about that, I would talk to him about it. But I don't think I should be giving public advice on the pardon power.
And in other news, President Joe Biden is pardoning the sentences of 39 nonviolent people and commuting the sentences of 1,500 others. This is the largest single-day act of clemency in modern American history, even more than President Obama.
Now, let's be clear with those who are getting a second chance, those 1,500 individuals. They had been under home confinement since the pandemic and rehabilitated back into their communities. In 2020, the CARES Act was enacted. That allowed for extended home confinement for certain prisoners when COVID-19 was spiking.
But reactions online are mixed. While some are praising the president for taking this action, saying, "Thank you, sir," and good to give them a second chance, others are less happy. One tweet reads, "The family, friends, pardons are here. How much money are you making on these pardons?" Says another, "Did Hillary Clinton pay for her pardon yet? Be careful, she may pay you in different ways." So that question, Bill Clinton got Niall at the beginning of the segment from The View. It was almost like unkind to put him in the position of having to say whatever he was going to say about that was going to end up being controversial. I think he mostly did it fine, but he should have even said, "Oh yeah, we talked to Joe Biden about that." Just say Hillary Clinton did nothing wrong, and I don't expect them to go after her because she's completely innocent, and that's that.
I know. I mean, it's tricky, particularly when he's asked on this kind of chit-chat kind of View type style to give a very formalized answer. He could easily have ruled it out, and he didn't do that. In terms of
Bill Clinton is doing them no favors at any point.
Bill Clinton has not done Hillary Clinton many favors a lot of times during her political career. I mean, way back
marriage.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's also true in a very different way. But I mean, even back in 2008, when there was the famous primary between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, Bill Clinton often played a rather counterproductive role in that. This is
He was like, "You're going to get me in the White House." It's like two presidents for one, and people are like, "Really?"
I don't know that we're so sure about that. There was also, I mean, Bill Clinton has a history of far more serious failures of judgment regarding his wife than this, even in terms of the legal picture, because I don't know if you remember, it was back in 2016. Remember that his plane and the then Attorney General's plane, Loretta Lynch, were side by side at an airport in Phoenix at the time that her emails were being investigated, and Bill Clinton popped in for a chat to the Attorney General, unspecified about what. The Attorney General later said that she was increasingly uncomfortable about it, and it became this whole big palaver. The comments that he made on The View, I didn't think were anywhere near. He was trying to wriggle out of, as you say, what was a difficult personal political situation.
Sure. Well, we are now getting pardons and mass commutations, which is something I wanted and something you wanted, something progressives and libertarians can come together to support. Are there people who have served time or who have sentences that were disproportionate, are no longer a danger to Americans, or for whatever, maybe that's not even violent crimes they're accused of? Can they be let go to save money, to prevent the overcrowding of our system, to show mercy. These are all things that many Americans support and believe in at least abstract ideological terms, in the case-by-case details that people argue over who's deserving or whether this person should remain behind bars and that sort of thing. I do wonder, I have to wonder whether he had planned to do this wave now, this day, or whether a plan to do this materialized in Biden's mind or in his team's mind after the harsh criticism over the Hunter Biden pardon. One of the lines of criticism being one I've made and I think you've made on the show that, well, he can pardon just about anyone, and he's not done that. He's just pardoned his son. So maybe he's trying to take some of the sting, some of the bite out of that criticism by saying, no, we're pardoning, and I haven't looked specifically at the list, but I assume there's some non-violent or low-level drug offenders or something in there too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole gulf between this and the Hunter Biden situation is by virtue of commuting this very large number of sentences, it is by its nature almost a blanket action and therefore removes the suspicion of doing things for selfish motives or nefarious motives. Obviously the Hunter Biden thing was very separate from that.
Yeah.
That was pardoning his own son in a way that he and his spokespeople had promised not to do, and the rationale for it seemed to be more or less invented on the spot for something that was of benefit to him as a family.
Not that I care or am in a position to give advice to Biden's communications team, but if they were going to do this all along, they should have announced them at the same time.
Yeah.
At the first, right, or just I'm pardoning a bunch. Here are all the people I'm pardoning. One of them is Hunter Biden. I guess it can get a separate explanation, but that would have removed the criticism that there's something selective about that.
Yeah,
I don't know why they didn't do them at the same time, except maybe they didn't think of doing this until after they got that kind of criticism. I have no idea, but they would suggest to me, or just suggest to me it was a badly thought out strategy.
Yeah, it seems one of many rather badly thought out Biden strategies at the last, the waning months of his presidency. But I mean, they announced the Hunter Biden thing on a Sunday evening. It naturally dominated the news for many days. A lot of Democrats were not enthused about it because of the degree to which it eroded the argument that they had been making, as well as President Biden, which was that no, people are not above the law, and then the president, elevates his son above the law. That was not great.
Yeah, we'll see if there are any more pardons to come while Biden remains president. He's got just a couple weeks left. When Trump takes office, one of the things he did promise in order to get support from the Libertarian Party, he got a kind of level of informal support from my people. He spoke at their convention. He promised to put a Libertarian in the cabinet. I'm not sure which of the picks specifically qualifies. There are certainly people who have been picked who have some libertarian impulses, but for instance, Kash Patel in some ways, Tulsi Gabbard in some ways, RFK Jr. in some ways, but very much not in other ways. So I'm not, maybe if you took aspects of them and amalgamated them into one person, you could say we have a libertarian in the cabinet. I mean, Linda McMahon's education views are probably aligned with libertarianism, but she was not like a member of the party or something. But one of the other promises was to free Ross Ulbricht, who is considered by many Libertarian Party members to be essentially a political prisoner along the lines of Julian Assange or Edward Snowden or something like that. This was a man who ran a kind of dark web market where you could buy and sell, including illegal things, but he was not involved in the illegal selling of it. He just set up the market, and libertarians will argue that they threw the book at him in a very unfair way. The judge treated him as if he had been the one doing the illegal transactions, and he got, I think, like life in prison or something like that, and he's been in prison for 5, 7, 8, 10 years, something like that.
And is the assumption
promised to free him?
And is the assumption that it's out of the question that Biden would pardon?
I hope Biden does it. I hope that would be fantastic. But Trump promised to do it. He promised to do it very early in his term. So we will be counting the day. It will be, we have 6 days into the Trump presidency. He's not pardoned yet. We're going to be upset.
Well, but the libertarians will be very angry.
We'll be so angry. Dozens of us will be marching in the street,
numbering in the tens.
But I would be happy to have Biden do it, or any of the other. Julian Assange is free, but should get a full presidential pardon, so he's able to travel to the United States, or indication from law enforcement that they were not going to prosecute him for anything, more so, and Edward Snowden the same. That's what I would like to see.
I mean, I don't want to cause rage on the part of Mr. Assange and Mr. Snowden's many hordes of online supporters, not least because their cases are now so far in the past that I can't remember all the specific details of it. I've thought that Assange was actually, did he not obtain information by helping someone hack into systems, which is a crime?
That is not what he is suspected of, no. That was Chelsea Manning who gave him the information. He is not suspected of doing anything himself illegal or surreptitious to obtain that information, just like, you know, the Pentagon papers and all that.
I'm glad I did not make a stand against Assange.
I believe that is the case. I'm like 92% sure, because yes, the details are a little bit in the rearview mirror now. People can correct me in the comments if it's different. But we do like to see, you and I both like to see pardoning of people getting second chances.
When justified.
When justified, it's a good thing. More Rising right after this. The Venezuelan gang Tren De Aragua has been spreading across the United States. You'll recall gang members seized an entire apartment building in Aurora, Colorado last year.
TDA, as it's commonly known, has been causing trouble in several U.S. cities.
A new report out from the Heritage Foundation chronicles the criminal organization's rise from a prison gang to a violent criminal enterprise with ties to the Venezuelan government.
And here to discuss with us is Lora, Ries, the Director of Border Security and Immigration Center at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome, Lora.
Having me on.
So just to start us off here, you know, obviously the issue of cartels, criminal gangs and so forth is a big issue generally. What makes Tren De Aragua special, for want of a better term?
Well, it's a few different factors. One, this is not a gang that the U.S. was familiar with before the Biden-Harris administration. We were much more familiar with other gangs like MS-13, et cetera. And so this is a new phenomena for the U.S. They are also extremely violent. There have been known cases, in addition to the Aurora apartment complex videos that you mentioned, Lake and Riley's convicted killer, Jose Ibarra, was a known member of TDA, as was his brother. Other crimes in New York, just a very violent group. And it goes back to the open borders that the Biden-Harris administration created. And now this gang is in at least 20 states. And it is very important that this gang be towards the top of the list for the mass deportations that need to occur once Trump comes in back to the White House.
Can you tell us how organized is this group? Does it have a top-down leadership structure? You know, when people with ties to it or membership in it in the United States and U.S. cities are committing crimes, how did they become involved with it? Is it more, it's the way they identify and it's not, you know, directed by some kind of leadership, or is it, you know, more formal in terms of how they become involved in it?
Well, this is something, as you said, that started in the prisons in Venezuela, and there does seem to be evidence that the Venezuelan government intentionally released many people from their prisons, including gang members. Combine that with programs that the Biden-Harris administration has created to allow them in, and then we see these gangs move into cities and localities like Aurora. They start in pre-established Venezuelan communities, migrant communities. They start with crimes there, like it could be hijacking, it could be armed robbery, it could be shoplifting, and they spread out from there in terms of their influence and as well as the violence and just taking control over buildings, neighborhoods, etc. So it is very networked, but it does seem to have the implicit backing from the Venezuelan leadership as another tool to use to destabilize the U.S.
Lora, I know you were putting a considerable amount of the blame on President Biden's immigration policies there, and I think you said something to the effect that this springs from or is rooted in that policy. But I mean, I read the report, and it talks in the broader terms about the fact that, you know, one of the issues is about 8 million Venezuelans have fled the Maduro government. So, I mean, isn't the problem here more broad than just the Biden administration? I note, for example, that the report talks about how the difficulty in distinguishing, this is a quote, distinguishing Tren De Aragua from regular Venezuelan migrants is, quote, a real conundrum for US law enforcement. So, I mean, that's not all on Biden, right? That is a genuine difficulty in making that distinguishment, no?
Well, it's a couple of factors. One, when you open your border and allow millions of illegal aliens from anywhere in the world to come into the U.S., then bad elements are going to exploit that, including Maduro sent, Venezuelans and gang members. In addition to that, the Biden administration has created mass parole programs for Venezuelans and other nationalities, allowing 30,000 to be paroled each month into the U.S. And so the border agents have been so overwhelmed by the volumes of people, we aren't able to vet really anybody, including gang members. And so, yes, they've had to rely on, known tattoo symbols or acquaintances. But when you overwhelm the system with high volumes of people from everywhere, it makes it that much more difficult to find the criminal elements that inevitably exploit that large flow of people.
Yeah, and just to clarify, because I think people who don't follow this issue wouldn't necessarily know all the terminology here. When you're referring to parole, you're referring to the Biden program that gives 30,000 people per month from 4 nations, including Venezuela, essentially the right to come here. Is that correct?
That's right. In the Immigration and Nationality Act, there's something called, it's immigration parole. So I don't want to confuse it with, criminal parole from prison. Immigration parole was intended to be rarely used on a temporary basis, on a case-by-case basis, for someone who doesn't have time to get a visa, but needs to come here for urgent humanitarian need, like emergency surgery, or something in the national public interest, like testifying in a criminal case. But what Secretary Mayorkas of Department of Homeland Security has done is mass paroled tens of thousands of people into the U.S. each month, which has not been temporary. It is not case by case, and it's certainly not for urgent humanitarian needs or significant public interest. These people have time to get a visa, but this administration is abusing the statute and giving it to nationals from Venezuela as well as other countries.
Speaking of abused aspects of the immigration process, of course, the asylum system has become so overwhelmed because that is the easiest and fastest way for illegal immigrants to enter the country and then get some court date set and then remain here while that is pending. And you have to just claim asylum, and it is very easy to do so, easier to take that route than the legal immigration route. What can, talking about solutions now, President Trump is taking office, has a mandate, clearly has the support of the public, vast majority of the public, to do something about the immigration system. What do you expect to see from him? What would you like to see to fix some of these problems?
Yeah, it's terrible that asylum has been so defrauded. One involves actually securing the border, not doing catch and release. The Remain in Mexico program during Trump's first term was very successful in this regard. It stopped the caravans of people from coming through Central America to the U.S. because they knew no longer could they just say a few words of fear and then disappear into the U.S. Also, having asylum cooperative agreements with Central American countries to enforce the notion that if you are truly fleeing for your life, you should be applying for asylum protection in the first safe country in which you enter, not country shop just to get to the U.S. But also, we have backlogs of millions of cases in the immigration court system, and the immigration judges need tools to quickly dispense of frivolous asylum cases and other types of attempts of fraud to get that backlog down, and then no longer would simply filing an asylum application by years here for illegal aliens, which they know, and it's one of the reasons that they file applications. It's to buy more time here.
Would more immigration judges work as well as additional tools? I mean, because I think that is something that it has been difficult to obtain funding for from Congress, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, the Congress is going to need to give considerable resources to interior enforcement, and that includes removal proceedings, which involves immigration judges as well as ICE trial attorneys. But it's not just a matter of more judges. They need the tools to kind of like summary judgment, and that is, even if these facts were true, you don't meet the threshold, you're not eligible for asylum, and so we're going to dismiss these cases. Right now, there are 3.7 million cases pending in the immigration court system. When Joe Biden came into office, that was 1.2 million. And then there's another 9.2 million cases pending over at the Department of Homeland Security. So unfortunately, there's a lot of fraud in there, and the people that suffer are the truly persecuted, whose case is buried among these millions of cases. So both of those backlogs need to be tackled.
Lora Ries of the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
After her unsuccessful run for Arizona Senate, former TV personality Kari Lake is returning to her roots in a fashion. President-elect Trump announced on Wednesday that Lake will head the congressionally funded media organization Voice of America.
Lake is a staunch Trump loyalist who launched her political career on sparring with her former journalistic colleagues and calling out quote-unquote fake news.
In a statement, Trump said that Lake will ensure that the American values of freedom and liberty are broadcasted around the world fairly and accurately, unlike the lies spread by the fake news media.
Users on X are sounding off about the announcement. Mehdi Hassan writing, "Authoritarians love to control and instrumentalize media organizations, especially state-funded ones. Good luck to the VOA."
And former Florida U.S. Senate candidate Debbie McCarcel-Powell quipped, "Voice of America is mandated to provide independent and unbiased news, free from political interference, yet here we are, Trump appointing Kari Lake. It's another blatant abuse of power, turning this news outlet into state-run media for political purposes. This is the kind of control we see in communist regimes like China." So we've found a job for Kari Lake
We have.
in the Trump administration, although this is pretty ostensibly non-political position.
We'll see how long that lasts.
And
with
she
Kari in
is
the
indeed
role.
a media figure. She has experience in TV personality. She is qualified for this role. She is.
Okay.
So
Would any TV anchor be qualified for the role, or just Kari?
Look, I am totally in favor of, we talk about cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. I would zero out the budget for this thing in a second.
Well, that's
We don't need Voice of America. The point of Voice of America is to provide pro-American propaganda in other countries. That's its purpose. That's its historical mission. I mean, correct me if you disagree or think I'm wrong, but it was set up to counter anti-American propaganda in other countries. We are that's what its mission is. So if liberals are going to be mad, like, oh no, we have a propagandist in charge, but that's his whole organization's purpose. Just shut it down. We don't need to be doing this. I don't think the U.S. government should be funding news, even if it's quasi or independent from congressional control. There's no point to this. This is a waste of money. It's not the Cold War anymore. Shut it down.
I think you have very deftly got around the point of Kari Lake here by segueing.
Well, I'm no fan of Kari Lake.
By segueing into a whole discussion about government-funded media. We could certainly have that discussion. Voice of America has, I think, been designed with the intention that you mentioned, a sort of propagandistic thing to get the American message out there. Yeah. Now, that's a separate...
Rah, America. She's the one for it.
That is a very separate question. For things to have some kind of power or authority in the media world, they do need to have some legitimacy to them. If Voice of America was just like nonsense, then obviously it doesn't serve any function at all. Kari Lake is someone who has never admitted that she lost the 2022 gubernatorial election in Arizona, was sued for defamation by the Republican recorder, I believe the title is, of Maricopa County in Arizona for claims that he said defamed him, suggesting that he had sort of been involved in faking the election results. She did not contest her liability, I believe that's the correct way of putting it in that case, and it was ultimately settled. So to put someone who has that record and that level of just incredibly bending the knee to Trump in that extraordinary way, in charge of a broadcasting organization.
She's a
just
TV
ludicrous.
personality, she's a governor, she's a senator, she does it all.
Why
do you hate a strong woman who can do multiple jobs at once, Niall?
I met Kari Lake in, when was it, the Iowa caucuses, I think, that Trump won this time around. She's very charismatic. She's a talented TV performer. She's also a complete blatant Trump propagandist who traffics in false facts repeatedly. And so to put someone like that at the head of an organization,
I think Trump has given he's playing four-dimensional chess here.
Is he?
Now,
is he?
Republicans in Arizona will finally be able to have a candidate who can win in this swing, but slightly right of center with any other candidate state. That's what I think the long game is.
She has lost.
Get her out to the side so that we can have a different candidate in future Arizona races.
Because she has now lost.
She's going to run the nomination every single time.
Yeah, I mean, there was also talking of the whole issue of Arizona Republicans. Was she not suspected of having recorded a phone call between her and the then chairman of the Republican Party of Arizona? There was a whole big kerfuffle about that.
Do you remember talking about that?
A phone conversation between her and this guy was recorded, and it was released, and it seemed to be to her advantage and his disadvantage that it was released.
Yeah, my reading of the situation and my slight knowledge of Arizona Republican politics, I lived in Arizona very briefly for a couple months in the year 2010.
Good.
I was an intern at the beginning, before my media career had taken off. I was an intern at the Goldwater Institute, which is the conservative think tank there.
What would Barry Goldwater think of Kari Lake as head of VOA?
I don't know that he would be so enthusiastic about her in particular. You know, Barry Goldwater, over the course of his career, went from being considered like the most right-leaning, conservative, far-right person ever in existence to someone who was viewed as like a moderate Republican at the end of his lifetime because he was not a social conservative. Right. He was not cool with the religious conservatives at all. He was just an anti-communist, libertarian on economics, national security hawk, but wanted nothing to do with the religious right. So he would be, his vision of the Republican Party, very different than what it is today. Kari Lake is, I think, a headache for the Arizona Republican Party, is how they view her, but she's just extremely popular among, you know, it's a little bit like Trump in the old days. Now Trump is popular with all Republicans. There's no dissent. It's over. It's his party. Dissenters are gone. Where she has a big kind of cult following, very loyal supporters, enough to always win a primary, but then not enough to win swing voters. Right. You know, you went from, when she ran for governor, the incumbent was a Republican, Doug Ducey, term limited. He had won his re-election 4 years before by a dramatic landslide victory, not even close. And then you go from that to her losing, narrowly, but losing. Mm-hmm. That's a her problem. But,
well, I mean, and also, of course, this year when Trump won the state comparatively comfortably, and she lost to Ruben Gallego in the Senate race. You know, so that is a problem.
So we'll have to see what her Voice of America policies are. But again, I challenge. I will take up your offer. Your terms are acceptable. The menace of Kari Lake can be dealt with by just abolishing this out-of-date Cold War era organization. I'm against government funding media. I actually don't even think it's constitutional, but we're doing it, whatever. I don't want to do it.
I enjoy flippant conversations about Kari Lake, but I do think there are legitimate journalists at Voice of America.
I'm sure there are legitimate. That's not to besmirch any of there are good journalists at NPR. There are good journalists at places I disagree with a lot. It's fine, but you know, especially in this day and age, with so many platforms and so many media models and so much of everything. Does the government need to fund this? No, that's what I say. Specifically to, I mean, don't you take a little bit of umbrage at the real purpose of the thing, which is to convince citizens of other countries that America is good and great and smart?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I do have some
progressive grounds.
I have some sympathy with that argument that it acts to say, like, America is great. Now, the counter argument is if you're broadcasting that message into, as it has its historical heritage, into, you know, communist, into the Soviet Union, or into places that are really benighted and giving anti-American propaganda, you can maybe argue a counterweight to that. Either way, we could discuss the abstract issue of that. I don't think Kari Lake in charge of a journalistic organization is a great plan.
All right, let us know what you think. More Rising yet to come. Stay with us. It's a party and Xi Jinping is invited. President-elect Donald Trump is inviting the president of China to attend his inauguration on January 20th. What an event that would be. Trump discussed the invite before he rang the bell on Wall Street today. Let's watch.
And a lot of world leaders there. We had about 80 world leaders, different countries, and they were all coming together. They all wanted to meet us and meet me as representative of the U.S., and there was a lot of goodwill, but we're going to get some really tremendous goodwill. I was even thinking about inviting certain people to the inauguration, and some people said, wow, that's a little risky, isn't it? And I said, maybe it is. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But we like to take little chances, but that's not a bad chance.
Caroline Leavitt, Trump's incoming White House press secretary, confirmed the invite, but it is unclear if Xi has accepted it.
Trump has long bragged about his close relationship with Xi, whom he notably hosted at Mar-a-Lago in 2017. Just last week, Trump said he gets along very well with the Chinese president and was recently communicating with him. Congressman Dean Phillips on X said of this invite, Trump's gesture to Xi Jinping to attend the inauguration is wise. Invitation is better than confrontation. And I agree with that. We need to, well, it's better to work with world leaders, even ones we're ostensibly at odds with over a variety of issues, and try to resolve those differences without having to resort toward to economic sanctions or self-sanctions, which is what tariffs effectively are. We don't want to have to do the tariffs on Chinese goods that Trump is talking about doing. So maybe if this is the beginning of having a conversation to stop having some of those punitive things happen that end up affecting us here, that would be good. I think it's, again, Xi Jinping is bad. I can say that because I'm not in the American government and I'm not going to meet with him. He doesn't care what I think. But he is responsible for a severe backsliding of Chinese democracy and of just authoritarian treatment of, the Uyghurs and political prisoners. I hold China responsible for COVID in either event, that it was a wet market or that it was in a Chinese lab. If it was in that lab, we are also responsible. But their transparency, their failure to act, their failure to share information about what was really going on made this much worse than it ought to have been. So they're culpable regardless, and that goes up to the top. So nothing nice to say there. But like Dean Phillips, I would like to see getting along, working together to solve mutual differences without sliding toward World War III, which is what many people in both parties seem to think is going to happen with China someday.
So I have a pretty simple riposte to that, which is that I don't see how getting along requires the invitation of Xi Jinping to a presidential inauguration.
Really?
Whatever we talk about being, a polarized country and all of that, and American democracy losing its luster, it is nonetheless the fact that the inauguration of an American president is a big day in this republic every 4 years. Now, Xi Jinping is atop a regime that has detained at least 1 million people in relation to the Uyghurs and others that you mentioned. It is possible to make the argument that you have to deal with these people in the general course of international diplomacy. Yes, it is better not to be at war with people or threatening war with people, but that does not mean that you have to invite some autocratic thug to the inauguration of an American president.
Well, that's interesting. I guess we just disagree on this one. I think it's...
But is there any... would you just invite everybody then?
I would invite Xi Jinping specifically because it is so important to have a better relationship between the U.S. and China. No.
But do you think he would take... is Xi Jinping going to be
I'm sure
taking umbrage if he's not invited to Trump's inauguration?
He might. I don't know. He's notoriously easily offended. But he's
never been
banned in his country depictions of him, of Winnie the Pooh, because he thinks it looks too much like him. So yes, I think
he's never been invited
who,
before. I'm not going to get offended generally if I'm not invited to something that no one's ever invited me to.
I don't think they have to invite every... But China is like the other most important country in the world right now.
Yeah,
you can find people of equivalent that I would find equivalently distasteful who are like dictators in, I don't know, Africa or South America, and I would say there's probably no need to invite them, but getting along really well with China is actually important. And if they invited them, I probably wouldn't care. I wouldn't say, oh, how dare you invite
Too big a
in.
dictator to fail.
I mean, that's kind of the truth, because we have to live in the real world. We have to come to some kind of arrangement with this person.
No, I mean, I'm not actually mocking that idea at all. I do think that obviously, if you look at the history of the past 100 years, I mean, the United States had to manage its relationship with the Soviet Union, which was responsible for all sorts of human rights abuses, and not, start firing nuclear wars on each other.
Nixon went to visit China at a time where they had recently been responsible for just as many atrocities and then some compared to the current regime.
No, that's true, but Nixon did that with the intention of creating some sort of détente.
Well, maybe that's what Trump's intention is too.
Well, maybe it is, but it doesn't require bringing this guy to the inauguration of an American president. I do think that the saving grace could be, I don't think he will come, because I don't think he would want to be seen as celebrating democracy when he is not a Democrat.
They have some important issues to work out right now, not just in terms of the tariffs, but also in terms of TikTok. That's an issue looming. The TikTok being the Chinese social media app for which there's been debate over how much authority or involvement the Chinese government could have or does have with it. It seems obvious to me that there has been some level of moderation on the platform that is favorable to the China perspective. I am perfectly willing to believe that was done at the behest of the Chinese government. The problem there is you could say the same of Twitter under its previous management, and also of Facebook, given the pressure that those companies received from federal agencies to take down content.
I mean, I think there was federal pressure, but do you think is that really a fair comparison? I mean, the Chinese government brings down a pretty heavier fist than the American government.
I think it's more than a fair comparison, because we have evidence of that, whereas evidence of the Chinese government's involvement in the version of TikTok that we get in America is theoretical and has not been. There's some data that maybe suggests, if you look at it close, it's not nearly as overwhelmingly obvious as the multiple emails we've now seen from various figures at agencies. Now, the TikTok version for China, that is no argument, is heavily, heavily censored by the Chinese government, just like the Google version in China. That is, that is heavily censored beyond any reasonable doubt. The version we're getting here, it's like how much, this is a fear of U.S. national security experts, is like, oh, we're getting Chinese propaganda on our app. Like, again, maybe we are, but there's not as much evidence of that, where there's overwhelming evidence that you were getting what I would, CDC propaganda. You would say you're fine with what the CDC has to say. And I'm fine. They can express what their views on social media, but they were effectively doing the content moderation themselves. But anyway, long story short, the date to have TikTok banned in the U.S. or banned in the app stores for U.S. social media companies is the end of January. And TikTok lost just the other day a court case to stop that ban. They're appealing to the Supreme Court. We will see if the Supreme Court takes up their case. Trump famously has changed his mind on this issue and no longer wants the app actually banned. So we'll see if that happens.
A rare point of unity between President-elect Trump and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez.
Yes, and myself as well. I'm in that camp too.
All the greats.
All the Trump, AOC, and Robby Soave. Lots more to come today on Rising. We'll be back in just a minute. Since mid-November, large drones spotted in the sky at night over central and northern New Jersey are getting the attention of government officials. New Jersey Congressman Jeff Van Drew on Wednesday claimed that one of America's enemies is responsible for these mysterious sightings.
I'm going to tell you the real deal. Iran launched a mothership probably about a month ago that contains these drones. That mothership is off, I'm going to tell you the deal. It's off the east coast of the United States of America. They've launched drones, is everything that we can see or hear. And again, these are from high sources. I don't say this lightly. Now, we know there was a probability it could have been our own government. We know it's not our own government because they would have let us know. It could have been some really glorified hobbyist or hobbyists that were doing something unbelievable. They don't have the technology. But let's pretend that's possible. The third possibility was somebody, an adversarial country, doing this. Know that Iran made a deal with China to purchase drones, motherships, and technology in order to go forward. The sources I have are good. They can't reveal who they are because they are speaking to me in confidentiality. These drones should be shot down.
The Pentagon has rejected the congressman's claims.
So aware of those drone sightings that have been reported, at this time we have no evidence that these activities are coming from a foreign entity or the work of an adversary. We're going to continue to monitor what is happening, but at no point were our installations threatened when this activity was occurring. These are not U.S. military drones. Again, this is being investigated by local law enforcement. What our initial assessment here is that these are not drones or activities coming from a foreign entity or adversary.
State and local officials convened a closed-door meeting on Wednesday at New Jersey State Police Headquarters. Montvale, New Jersey Mayor Mike Casale, who attended the meeting, said, quote, "At this time, according to the FBI, there are no known specific or credible threats related to these sightings." That's per a DHS handout. New Jersey Assemblywoman Dawn Fantasia wrote on X, quote, "There have been reports ranging from 4 to 180 sightings per night. The drones operate in a coordinated manner and not identified as hobbyist drones or related to DHS."
New Jersey State Senator John Bramnick on Fox and Friends called for a limited state of emergency. Let's watch.
Well, it's unlikely we get more information. All of these drones should be grounded until we know where they're coming from and what their purpose is. The reason I call for a limited state of emergency is we do that in a snowstorm the day before the snow. Here's a situation where people are worried about drones flying over their houses, flying over military bases, and there seems to be no answer. So my concern is twofold. One, if the government doesn't know, that's pretty scary. And if they do know and there's no transparency, that might be worse.
This is pretty wild.
It's pretty wild and pretty weird. But
yeah, I'm not satisfied at all by the suggestion that it's Iran. Does Iran have the capability to do that?
Doesn't seem to be any.
Iran can't even land actual missiles in Israel when they fight them. They can't keep their leader safe from helicopter crashes, although I take it helicopters are a lot more dangerous than people might be led to believe. So why are they just putting drones over New Jersey? It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
Although that representative, Jeff Van Drew, said he had some intelligence suggesting that. Now the Pentagon denies that utterly, but if I'm taking that, if I recall what that spokesperson just said, she did say that they believe it is a foreign adversary, but not Iran.
I'm
or
not
a foreign group.
I'm not sure.
What does that mean?
There's so much that is opaque about this. The Pentagon pushed very hard back against the Iran thing, not only in general terms, but the congressman there used this phrase about a mothership that he had somehow heard was off the East Coast from which these drones are being launched. The Pentagon says that's absolutely untrue. There is not some Iranian ship, off the coast of Jersey from which drones are being launched. I do think it is very bizarre. I think everyone agrees it's very bizarre.
It must have some explanation.
There must be. Somebody is flying these drones. The places over which they have been flown includes Bedminster, President-elect Trump's New Jersey estate, also a naval weapons station, a huge reservoir in New Jersey. So it's not really acceptable that somebody can be flying large numbers of drones over locations of that degree of sensitivity, and there's just a sort of shoulder shrug about it.
Well, there's certainly going to be speculation that the shoulder shrug is because it is in fact U.S. military technology, and so we're not particularly worried because this is our stuff, and so there's going to be surveillance and spying concerns like are we testing out the ability to do mass surveillance of the population? Is it that kind of thing? If civilians shoot them down, well then the American government's going to recognize and remember real fast that they're ours. To be clear, I have no evidence or necessarily to suggest that they are ours, except that there's no other explanation. If it's not a foreign adversary, although they kind of try, and I do not trust, by the way, the Pentagon says, oh yes, some foreign adversary. We should not take that at face value whatsoever.
I'm all in favor of skepticism generally, and I'm skeptical of lots of government claims overall. I do think that it is unlikely that there is an Iranian mothership off the coast of New Jersey that the Pentagon is denying is there.
I'm simply not in a position to evaluate. The hobbyist explanation is not at all crazy, and in cases like, there are cases like this where we're confused, where it's just some guy doing something. The drone technology is getting very sophisticated, even for what we're calling hobbyists or amateurs, to do a science project or something and do something really impressive. That is now happening. So it could be something like that, although then specifically flying over these places suggests, why would you do that? I don't know. Well,
yeah, there is also a question in relation to what should be done about them, even if we don't know their source. And there is a legitimate difficulty about shooting down drones, because of course you can't necessarily control where they land, and if they crash, and they're heavy, and if they crash through the roof of somebody's house and cause injury or worse, then that would obviously be a disaster in and of itself. But it does raise the question about, well, what can be done, and can we capture them in some way? I don't know. I don't know enough about anti-drone technology, which I assume is to some level.
Scoop them up in a little net. You have
exactly.
A drone with a net.
Just bring a little plane with a net around
a Pokemon ball at it.
Cartoon style, and just catch them in the net and take them to a safer location. I don't know what you do though.
Well, this will not be the last time we discuss the drones.
The mystery drones.
Show, I would guess.
New Jersey is full of surprises.
Yeah, a lot of jokes on social media about the surveilling of my people, my culture, Italian Americans.
There you go.
Not that I'm New Jersey connected specifically, but the Tony Soprano being spied on.
Well, the New Jersey Riviera was Italian Americans and Irish Americans, so our common ground there.
Yeah, so. We're walking here. Lots more to come on Rising. Stay tuned.
WNBA star player Caitlin Clark should be celebrating being named Times Athlete of the Year, but instead she has mixed emotions. In an interview for the cover story, Clark said, quote, "I want to say I've earned every single thing, but as a white person, there is privilege. A lot of those players in the league that have been really good have been black players. This league has kind of been built on them." She also added, "The more we can elevate black women, that's going to be a beautiful thing."
Clark is getting slammed for striking an apologetic tone. Conservative media personality Megyn Kelly eviscerated Clark, posting on X, quote, "Look at this, she's on the knee all but apologizing for being white and getting attention. The self-flagellation, the, oh, please pay attention to the black players who are really the ones you want to celebrate. Condescending, fake, transparent, sad." Blaze TV sports host Jason Whitlock lamented that wokeness had destroyed Clark. Take a look.
But I read the entire article, and when I was done, I nearly cried. I'm not joking. I nearly cried. And it now that I will add this little bit of joke or humor to it, but I immediately thought of the scene in The Godfather. Look how they massacred my boy. And that's when I read the Time article. I was like, they done massacred Caitlin Clark. The way that I felt about Caitlin Clark was how I felt watching Tiger Woods. And I would watch Tiger Woods, whether it was a major championship or just a regular tour event. And it was just utter joy I felt watching Tiger Woods. And they've taken that from me.
So, lots of conservative dissatisfaction with Caitlin Clark, who they had previously defended quite a bit. Look, I guess, I think if I would give I would not be as outraged as they are about this, mostly just because I don't follow basketball whatsoever. But to describe, to try to undercut one, it was more than being humble, to try to undercut her own achievements and say there's some, like, if I was to point to, like, aspects of our society where I think certainly there is racism involved and there is white people or privilege advantages being had, I absolutely agree with that. I'm not sure I would point to professional basketball as an area where even during much more segregated and racially fraught times, black people have a long history of excelling at terrifically, and that's a good thing and should be uplifted. So I'm not really sure what she's trying to say here, that she had some advantage, but this isn't, I think most people would agree, even people who think racism is a very serious thing still in our society. Is this an area where white people are getting some kind of advantage?
I think it is, actually, and let me explain why. I think that Caitlin Clark is making a point that I would certainly defend, which is that she is, I think, arguing about a kind of remnant of cultural racism that tends to raise up the achievements of white people and diminish the achievements of black people, including black athletes. Now, there was another occurrence of this about a decade ago when Serena Williams, who was already plainly the best female tennis player in the world, was earning roughly half in endorsements of what Maria Sharapova, a Russian white blonde tennis player, was earning in those endorsements. And Williams was as magnanimous, I thought, as she could be, saying that if they want to market someone who is white and blonde, that's their choice. But it was obviously a cultural phenomenon that was completely untethered to their ability. In the NFL, where more than half of the players are black, it is only very recently that the number of black quarterbacks has reached anywhere near parity with the black representation in that league as a whole. And that was to do with racist attitudes that the quarterback was the brains of the operation and therefore it should be a white person. Wow. So all of these things are valid points.
When I was growing up, the biggest sports superstar in the world was Michael Jordan.
That's true.
And then there was LeBron James.
Yes.
And then there was, I have a hard time, I'm sure there are pay disparities and examples of racial prejudice, but the terrific achievements which have been widely celebrated in this category specifically of black Americans is, I think...
I don't really accept that argument, Robbie, because it is about exceptionalism. Like, people say, for example, the Michael Jordan instance in sports, or referring back to another time in American popular culture before even Jordan, people would say stuff like, if you look back to the 1970s, like Richard Pryor was one of the most famous comedians in the country. Richard Pryor was like 100 times funnier than anybody in the world at that time, so of course he's going to be raised up. Michael Jordan is the best basketball player of all time by almost everyone's, well, it's actually debated between him and LeBron, but yeah. Michael Jordan is a truly exceptional figure. It doesn't disprove racism to say that.
What is that? It doesn't racism. I'm not disproving racism. I wouldn't try to disprove racism. Racism is a real factor. It's just to say that it's always racism or racism is never. This is an area, to my mind, where you're getting down to baseline talent. To achievement, and there are, and in basketball specifically, black people are overrepresented on the teams, and that's fine to me. And
well, overrepresented
as a
to their share of the population,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, which is fine. Who cares?
Well, yeah, well, I mean, because it is decided by ability. But I just think that, firstly,
as all things should be.
I think that Megyn Kelly's response is typically mean-spirited and inflammatory, to be honest. But
I think
I'm not a fan.
Top. I don't disagree that it's a little over the top. I'm not sure I would make a segment cry. I'm not sure what she had to say brings me to tears, but it's mostly just because I'm not a big basketball fan anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge basketball fan, but I think that Caitlin Clark making the point, she cited Maya Moore, a black WNBA player who was one of her collegiate basketball player primarily, who was one of her big heroes. Maya Moore was a very vocal supporter of Black Lives Matter and things like that, and I think Clark's position is that weighs against those kind of people, Maya Moore, getting the kind of acclaim that Caitlin Clark gets.
Well, in other Time Magazine related news, President-elect Donald Trump has been named their Person of the Year. This is the second time he was picked for the coveted top spot. He was also Person of the Year in 2016 when he first won the presidency. He reacted prior to ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Let's watch.
Well, thank you very much. This is an honor, a tremendous honor. I brought some of our compatriots along with us. They're going to do a beautiful job for you for the next 4 years. And it's really been something very special. And I have to say, Time Magazine getting this honor for the second time, I think I like it better this time, actually. But we did a good job. We had a great first term, despite a lot of turmoil caused unnecessarily. But the media's tamed down a little bit. They're liking us much better now, I think. If they don't, we'll have to just take them on again, and we don't want to do that. But I do want to thank Time Magazine. I've been on the cover many times. I don't know who has the record, but I can only probably talk well about 25% of the covers. 25% are great. The others I just sort of hide. But it's been an honor, and every time it's an honor, I will tell you. And thank you very much for doing it. And thank the whole group at Time. Really very professional people. Thank you very much.
The record, in case you're wondering, does in fact belong to FDR, who was 3 times. I don't think there might have been someone else who's been 3 times. Nobody's been more than 3 times. There's been a couple repeat winners, Churchill, Bush, Obama, I believe, as well, and so on. But Trump, a 2-time winner now. And then one other thing I wanted to mention from his Time interview. So he was interviewed by Time for this. He was asked, this might be of interest to you and some of our readers, he was asked, do you trust Benjamin Netanyahu? And Trump's response was, I don't trust anybody.
That is interesting. It is interesting because his position on that conflict has generally seemed very pro-Israel, but has at times veered into interesting areas. And he certainly has expressed, I don't know if dislike would be too strong a word, but he has expressed skepticism about Netanyahu at times in the past. And there we go.
I should correct myself because it's his 3rd time, because we were all Person of the Year.
You loved the Time new Person of the Year cover.
Yes, I do. That is it for our show today. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can get podcasts. Are you on tomorrow as well, Niall?
I am indeed.
You're working harder than I am
Oh,
this week.
you're just into the holidays, Robby, and then that'll be that.
Good for you. Tomorrow will be Niall and Amber. You won't want to miss it. See you later.